Hello viewers, and welcome back to another Roblox Studio tutorial. In this video I'm going to be summing up the essential basics of creating your game, creating your place, building your place, and editing it. So right here you can see I've combined all or mostly all of the things we've been doing over the episodes and tutorials I've been showing you, and that's with terrain, building your structures and stuff like this. You can get more in depth with it and methods of building, ways you want to build, but I've just been showing you my ways. And so in this video I'm going to sort of finalize it, make it so your game can pop by editing and looking into lighting and the lighting properties, the settings, everything you can do with lighting. And what lighting is going to do is going to change your game's overall, well, what it's saying, it's lighting, and it's going to change whether it's dark, whether it's morning, whether it's night, stuff like this, whether the color of your game is neon blue or neon pink, or if it's very dark and there's a lot of contrast, or if there's a lot of brightness. You can edit all of that in the lighting, and you can add a lot of things like make sun rays and, well, tons of stuff. We're going to get into it, and overall it's going to make your game pop. It's going to make it look really nice, and so let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to do to ensure we can see and edit our lighting settings and make sure we can access them is open our Explorer and Properties windows. We can start by going to the View tab, and once we're in there we can go to Explore and Properties. There are two very big buttons and all the way on the left. You can click both of those and that will open both of them. Explorer will be on the top for me and Properties will be below the Explorer. And if you go into your Explorer, you'll notice you have the option to choose lighting. It'll be two below the workspace, which will be at the top of your Explorer. You can click on lighting, and if you have your properties open, it'll show you all the settings within lighting. And there are other things you can add to lighting by doing insert object, but we'll get into that later, and they all have their own respective settings. So I'm going to go through and explain what each of these settings are, and then after that we'll go through and edit them, and we'll show how it changes your game. So the first setting we have here in lighting is ambient, and this is referring to ambient lighting, which is the available light in your environment or the atmosphere around your environment. So if we go ahead and change this color, we're going to change it right here, and we're going to change the ambiency to red. So now we can see our ambiency is red, and the atmosphere or the light in our environment has changed to red. The snow starts to look red, the ice has a red tint, the rock is starting to look more red, and it sort of gives off this warm color. So similarly, if we wanted to give it a cool ambiency, we can go over to blue and make it dark blue, and it won't really be noticed, but you can drag it up here and make it neon blue, and overall that's just changing the ambiency and light in your environment. The next property is brightness, and this will just basically affect the brightness of the light in your environment. It won't change the respective brightness of every light in your game, just the environmental light. So if I change it to be very bright, our terrain is going to look very bright. It's going to almost be like a glare, and it's going to hurt your eyes probably. So it's going to change the entire game's brightness. The next property is color shift bottom, and the exact definition of this is the hue represented in light reflected in the opposite surfaces to those facing the sun or the moon. So this will basically, in basic terms, change the color of the bottom part or the bottom surface of your part with respect to the position of the sun and the moon. The next one is color shift top, and as you would expect, it's the opposite of color shift bottom, and in this case it's the hue or color represented in light reflected from surfaces facing the sun or the moon, and most commonly this would be like the top of your parts or the top surface. Now, interestingly enough, both of these can be affected by the brightness property, so the intensity of your color shift bottom and top will be changed by how intense your brightness is as well. The next two options are environment diffuse scale and environment specular scale, and this property is dynamic and will change according to your sky and the time of day that you have set. It's also recommended that you change your ambient or outdoor ambient respectively when you change the diffuse scale. A unique thing about diffuse scale is that it also makes the skybox show up at night, so that might be something you want to use if you're trying to make your skybox show up at nighttime. The next one is environment specular scale, and this will make smooth objects reflect the environment that you have in your game. And It's especially important if you're trying to make certain materials in your game look more realistic. So it'll make them reflect more or less, so you can turn it up or down. The default is 0, so I don't know if you can make it less. No, you can't go below 0. So you can make it more shiny, like for example, metal. If I went over here, this is a metal roof. If I turn up my specular, you can see that it's starting to shine more, as you would expect for metal. The next property is global shadows, and essentially what this option will do is render shadows of sheltered and unlighted areas depending on the position of your sun, and if it's nighttime, the moon. It's also important to know that the hue of these shadows will be affected by your ambiency and what color ambient you have set. So if I go ahead and click global shadows, you're going to see a big difference in how the sun's position affects the environment with the position of each model on my terrain. Just like that, there's a bunch of shadows from the trees, and there's one on the shed and everything else. Now if you wanted to get a bit more creative, you could go over here to your clock time. You could drag this around and it'll change those global shadows, but we'll get more into that later. The next option is outdoor ambient, and this will essentially serve a similar or same purpose as the regular ambient property, but in this case it changes the hue applied to outdoor areas, so specifically for outdoor areas. It's also important to know though that if your default ambient property exceeds its corresponding outdoor ambient, then the hue of the original ambient property will begin to also apply to outdoor areas. So don't make your ambient too extreme if you want your outdoor ambient to also work. The next option or property is your shadow softness, and this will change how blurry or hard-edged your shadows are. So right now it's at a medium value, so if I make it 0, it'll be very distinct and hard-edged. If I make it 1, it'll be very soft and blurry. And that's pretty much it for shadows. Also, before I forget, it will only work with shadow map or future technology or lighting technology, whatever you want to call it. And so just like I was talking about, the next property is the technology or your lighting technology. And you have 4 options. There used to be one included called legacy, but the other ones are compatibility, future, shadow map, and voxel. The 2 we're going to be using or focusing on for your realistic game, or the one that will make it pop the most, are future and shadow map. But the other ones, I'll explain them quickly as to how their shadows and lighting works. So the first one is compatibility, and with compatibility, the description of it is that it's an approximation of legacy rendering using newer future is bright technology. Another fun fact is compatibility is the one that replaced legacy. The next one is voxel, and with voxel, this one features shadows created with a 4x4x4 voxel map. The next one is our shadow map, and the only description this provides is that it features crisp shadows. And the last one is future, and this one really will make your lighting stand out, and it really brings out the true color and reflectance and customizability of your materials and parts in your builds and your game overall. And then we move on to the next section of lighting, which is data. The first option we have here obviously is class name, but that's hidden, blurred out, and we do not have access to changing the name of lighting. The next option after this is clock time, and this will allow you to change the hours or time of your day and whether the sun or moon is showing, whether it's day or night, stuff like this. So if you just drag it all around, you can see day and night, day and night, day and night, right? The next one is geographic latitude, and in basic terms, this will essentially change the angle and position of the sun and how it's going to be facing in your game and from where. So the shadows turn there, and we can move it over here, and now the shadows are going towards the right. Now we can't change the class name, of course, but we can change the name of our lighting in the Explorer. So we can change it to Game Light if we want. And in scripting, this is how you will get or receive or call to your lighting in your game. And with the parent, I'd always keep it to place 1 because that will make it remain on this game. So I'd leave it there. And then the last one is time of day. It works similarly to clock time, except for it's really a 24-hour string representation of your current time of day. And I think it's a little bit more specific. The last properties we have here are if it's archivable, the exposure compensation, and our fog options. Changing your exposure compensation option or property will allow you to show more detail in lighter or darker areas. So if we were to make it 1, for example, there will be more exposure and it'll be brighter, but not in a sense that it's actual brightness of your game, but the exposure of your environment in game. And if we were to make it -1, it would be less exposed, it would be darker, and I guess you could say it's less bright, but it's not actually the brightness that we're changing, just the exposure. The last 3 are our fog options, and with fog color, it's basically just changing the color of your fog. Pretty basic. Fog end is where your fog will end, and fog start is where your fog will start. So if you have your fog end super high, you're never going to see the fog and it's not going to appear, but let's say we make it 1,000, now it'll start to appear. We're in radius and radial view to where we can see the fog and it will appear on our screen. Now if we change the fog start, this will change the distance between where we can see the fog and where we can see it start. So let's say we make it 100, we can see the fog starts more in the distance, but it is there and it's not right in our face. So if we make it 10, we can see that it gets closer, inches closer, but we still have a little bit of visibility in front of us. So you can play around with that. Maybe you want to make it super foggy, so we'd make it 0 and like 50. And now it's super foggy and you can't see anything in front of you, not until you walk a few steps. So that's pretty much it for the lighting properties, and I hope you guys learned something new with the lighting properties. And now we're going to be playing around with them to make it match our environment, make it look nice and real. We're going to make it stand out, and overall it's going to look nicer than it does or if there was no editing to your lighting. But before I go any further, I want to mention the 5 objects that you can add to your lighting. This includes sky, sun rays effect, the color correction effect, bloom effect, and the blur effect. We're also going to roughly cover every property of them and things you can change within them. There's also one that doesn't initially show up when you first open your lighting and try to insert an object, and that is atmosphere. You can add that, and that will allow you to add an atmosphere to your game. And this is fairly new, so we can play around with that as well. So what I'm going to do is add a atmosphere, and then I'm going to also add a sun rays effect, and I'm also going to add a bloom effect, and I don't think I'll need to add a color correction effect, but we'll go over all the other ones as well, just for sake, as you can see what the blur did just there, and then we added a sky. So we're going to go ahead and cover blur since it just appeared right in our face, and we're going to need to take that out if we don't want to be blinded. So the option you have to edit here is size, and this will change the intensity of the blur in your game. You could do some pretty neat things when you're programming with this. So like, let's say you get hit with a flashbang when you're in a fighting game and you change the lighting to where the blur increases suddenly and then it starts to fade out. Maybe you could do something like that. That could be pretty interesting. But this will basically change how blurry your lighting looks and how it'll look and how a player will see things in your game. The next one I want to go over is the bloom effect, and this will basically simulate the camera viewing a very bright light, and it causes brighter colors to glow, similar to applying neon to everything, including the sky. So it'll make everything essentially glow up, and that's pretty much basically what it does. If you have multiple bloom effects, you can compile them together, and they will basically combine and work together. And we have 3 options in this property. We have intensity, size, and threshold. With the intensity, this will change the blending intensity of your bloom. Size, this will change the radius of your bloom and how big it is, to put it in basic terms. And then the last one is threshold, and this will determine how bright a color must be before it blooms. So if your threshold was set to 1, only pure white colors would bloom. As if it was set to 0, all colors will bloom. So the lower it is, the more likely your color is going to bloom. The next option I want to discuss is color correction, and this can be used to adjust several color related properties at once. Things like saturation, the tint color, brightness, and your contrast. And it's really useful for fine-tuning the visuals of your game or your world. The sun rays effect does what you might have expected, and it essentially renders a halo of light around the sun. The halo and rays will also be shaped or blocked by world objects between the camera and the sun. The next one is your sky and atmosphere, and you need a sky to actually have an atmosphere. So let's say I deleted sky here and my atmosphere would go away. So now I have to add it back. And with the sky, you can add a skybox. You can determine how many stars are in there at night. You can determine the sun angular size. So let me find the sun real quick. I cannot find the sun. Well, that will change the size of your sun and whether it's going to be huge or very tiny like the sun in real life. And it'll change the intensity of the sun as well visually. You can also change the size of the moon, and if it's massive or bigger than the sun, or if it's smaller and like barely recognizable. You can also change the texture of the sun, so you can put a custom sun in there. Just don't make it something that wouldn't make sense, because then it won't look like a sun. The atmosphere object add-on, whatever you want to call it, is pretty interesting because it's more advanced and will really push your Roblox game closer to a realistic environment. Because in this case, sunlight actually scatters in different ways depending on the density of your atmosphere and other air particle properties. With this, you can control the haze and glare conditions. As you can see, there's options there. And this will allow you to tune a sunset or make an afternoon that's foggy, or just having an atmosphere. You can also change the colors of your atmosphere as well as the decay. Changing the color will change the hue and can be used for making subtle environment moods. And decay will define the hue of your atmosphere. And it sort of gradually falls off from your color. So the color of your decay will slowly start to fade away from your actual color property. So that pretty much finishes it up for the object settings and the objects that you can add into lighting. I advise you guys to go play around with this and look into the Roblox Developer Hub, because I don't think I explained it as well, and me just explaining it won't really get you tuned into how these lighting settings work. So I advise you, please go into your Roblox studio, add these objects, play around with them, look into the Developer Hub and see how they work, and then go ahead and work on your game and get it to how you want it to look. The next lighting based things we're going to be looking at are things like point lights, spotlights, surface lights, and how they affect your game, the environment, and the area like inside of buildings. As you can see here, there's light bouncing off of the walls, off of the floor, and it's going everywhere. It's reflecting and it makes the room look more realistic. I'm going to go over how the color changes this, the options and settings and properties inside of each light, like the face, range, angle, and brightness and color, how this can change it, as well as how they work with your lighting settings in the Explorer. So we're going to go ahead and go through that, and hope you guys learn something new when we're doing that. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is add a part into our workspace by going up here and clicking part. You can find that in the Home tab or Model tab. We're going to make sure we have that anchored by going up here, and we're going to name this light part. You can name it anything you want. You can name it light brick, light, whatever you want. Then I'm going to add a light of my choosing to this. I'm going to type in light. We're going to get point light, spotlight, and surface light. For this, I'm just going to use a surface light, and this will basically point one light. The next thing we're going to do is add what light we want to go into this part. The first thing we're going to start with is the spotlight. So we're going to type in light into our search object, and we're going to do spotlight. And then this should make a light that points in a certain direction. We're also going to duplicate this part 2 times. So then we're going to have 3 spotlight bricks, but then we're going to delete the spotlight out of the other ones. We're going to go ahead and insert object, type in light again, and we're going to put in a point light, and then I'm also going to do a surface light for the next one. We're going to explore every single one of these. I'm also going to change it to nighttime so you guys can see these lights better. So what we're going to do is go down here to lighting. I have it named game light right now, but I'll change it back to lighting really quick so we know what we're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and change our clock time to where it's nighttime, and this will make our lights more visible. Now you can notice the difference between these. Each of these have specific purposes and specific facing directions. With the point light, it will provide a light source that emits illumination from one single point. The next one to the left here is a surface light, and this source will emit illumination of a specified color and brightness from a certain face for a specified range. And then the last one is the spotlight. And in the case of a spotlight, it will emit light of a specified color and brightness in the shape of a cone that is ideal for directional light sources like flashlights or headlights. And now that I've explained those, we're going to go ahead and explore them and see how they work when we change their properties. So starting with the spotlight, we learned that it emits a cone shape. So what we're going to do is see how it works as it's working as a cone. So what I'm going to do is access the properties of this light by clicking on the light and then going to the properties window. I'm then going to change the range so it emits further, and I'm also going to change the face because right now this is the front of my part and I want it to be pointing down, so I'm going to make it face on the bottom. So right now that we have it facing to the bottom, we can see how it forms a circular shape and it is working like a cone. We're going to make it more distinct by making it brighter, and we're going to make it more angled if we want, but this will make it so we can see how the cone emission is actually working. Now the difference between this one and the others is that you can change the angle, so this will change how far that light reaches without actually having to change the brightness of it. And the brightness really changes the brightness of the concentrated area within the specified range. And then you can also change its color. Changing its color will do what it says, and it'll just change the color of the emitted light. And this goes for all of the lights. What also goes for all of the lights is the enabled button, so you can turn it on or off, and this will allow you to change whether a light comes on or off in a script. Like, let's say you click a button, you can say turn it off, turn enabled off, and it will turn the light off. You can also determine if it picks up shadows and if it wants to dodge shadows. So like, let's say we place it above this tree. If I turn off shadows for this, it's not gonna care about this, and it's gonna go straight through it. Oops, wrong one. And it's going to go right through the tree, and it's not going to pick up the leaves on it, the trunk, or anything like that. So if you want your shadows to look more realistic when being picked up or interfered with by light, make sure you have shadows on. And this goes for all of them still. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one, and then we're going to move on to the point light. The only difference is that this one has a range, and it is not restricted by an angle as the spotlight did. This one's not restricted by any angle, so you can go as far as you want and you can change the brightness, and it's not restricted. It's just covering the entire area. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that one because that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then I'm going to move on to the surface light. So similarly, we're going to have to change the face to bottom. And with this light, it changes with the size of the part. So depending on the size of your part, the light actually will change, and it will change along with the surface, and that's what the surface light is. So let's say we want to change the angle of the surface light. Now it will correspond and change its angle based on your shape and the shape that it's coming from. So let's say I have an angle of 0. It's going to make a direct beam of light, and it's not going to be spreading anywhere, and it's going to be very sharp edged. And let's say I make it maximum, which will be 180, and this will start to look more like a circle. It'll have rounded edges, and basically it's still supposed to be a square, except it's more dispersed and it's smooth and it's more blurry. You can also change the range at which this light emits to. So let's say I have the angle at maximum, which is 180, but I only want it to emit to a certain range. It will be restricted to this boundary of range, so it'll be 9 studs. And let's say I want to turn the angle down now. Now it will also turn it down, and that range will still be in effect as long as it's not 0. Because if it's 0 and you change the range, nothing will happen. It'll either disappear or be very bright. And that pretty much sums it up for lighting. I hope I taught you guys something new today. I hope I explained it pretty well. I'm not really so in tune with lighting, but I do know about it. I know the basics of it, but I really encourage you guys to go play around with this lighting. You have to play around with the lighting to get used to it and make sure you know what does what, because a lot of them are very similar and they really just have fine differences, very small differences, and one can affect another in a pretty big way. And just like the environment diffuse property we went over, it can change how metal looks more realistic than before. So in the next episode, we're actually going to use what we learned today, and we're going to actually edit the game. We're going to edit our environment, and we're going to make it look realistic. In this video, I showed you how to edit the properties, find them, and work with them, and I also explained what the properties were and the rough definition of them. If you guys want a more specific definition and you want all the information, make sure to go to the Roblox Developer Hub. I'll leave a link in the description to everything I went over, or most of it. If you have any questions about what we went over or you need help, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Otherwise, I hope you guys learned something new today. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video, and hope you enjoyed. See ya.